Hello, I'm Cosmic Zen. Thank you for joining me on this logical and rational exploration of the Noah's Ark story. Now, before I get started, I would like to say that there's many different religions who embrace the Noah's Ark story besides Christianity. And I won't get into any of the variations of the Islam version or the Judea version or the Babylonian or Sumerian or the dozen other ones who have versions of it. My exploration is coming from the King James Version of the Bible. Please feel free to pause this presentation at any time to reference your own Bible, as there are many different versions of the Bible and you can see how yours relates to what I'm trying to convey here. Let's start off in Genesis chapter 6, verse 6, where God repents for having created man. He sees the evil man has done and he repents his decision to even have made man. And this poses some significant problems in that if God is repenting, and this isn't the only time in the Bible that God repents, it shows that he's not omniscient. He does not know the future. You can't regret a decision if you know what the decision is going to be before you made it. So this shows that God is not omniscient. It also shows that he's fallible. He's made a flawed creation, and he feels bad about it, enough that he wants to destroy the entire earth. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 17, God talks about how he's going to destroy all the animals of the earth because of the evils of man. There's some problems here in that why are the cows and the horses and the elephants and all these other animals, why do they have to be punished and killed because of the evils of men? Not only that, but why do little children who are innocent and pregnant women with unborn children inside them and all the babies, why do they have to die? How can they be evil? If he's killing all the animals that creepeth on the ground on the face of the earth, why doesn't he kill the mammals of the water? The dolphins and the whales are just as equally as guilty as the kangaroos are. Now, right after that, he starts to discuss with Noah the dimensions of the ark, which is 300 cubits by 150 cubits wide by 30 cubits tall. Now, there are many estimated guesses as to how big a cubit is. Now, I've done my estimations at about a foot. A 3-story building is approximately 30 feet tall, so I equated a cubit with about a foot, but some say it's a foot and a half. You can do your own calculations. Either way, the square cubic area of the ark is 450,000 square cubits. Now, to give you a little idea about how big that is, that's about half the size of the White House. It's about 3 football fields stacked on top of each other. Then in chapter 6, verse 19, he goes on to tell Noah that there will be 2 of each animal coming to stay on the ark. Now, in chapter 7, which we're about to get to, he talks about how there will be 7 of the clean animals and 7 of the clean birds to come. And this poses some problems in that they didn't know what the clean and unclean animals were at the time. Genesis chapter 7, verse 6 says that Noah was 600 years old when he started to build the ark. In verse 11, it says that the rain started on the 2nd month on the 17th day, so for argument's sake, even though they used a different calendar, we'll say that's February 17th. Genesis chapter 7, verse 14, God says that he's going to bring every kind of fowl to be upon the ark. Now, this poses some obvious problems in that not all birds fly. Look at the penguin in Antarctica, for example, and the lower tip of South America. Did they swim all the way to the Middle East to ride into the ark? How about the ostriches and emus who couldn't even fly? Consider also the birds in North America who would have to flown across the ocean to get to Noah's Ark. Now, the birds who are land-based birds, say the California condor, for example, it wouldn't have the energy to just fly across the ocean without sleeping. It would take it several days. And birds like that just don't sleep on the water. It would be impossible for those birds to make that trip. And not only the birds, think of the land animals that are indigenous to the different areas of the world. Say, the kangaroo. How would the kangaroo have gotten to the Middle East? If God somehow miracled these animals to the Middle East, then why didn't he just miracle them inside some kind of magic bubble while he killed everybody? In fact, why couldn't have God just snapped his fingers and killed everybody? Why did he have to flood the whole world? It just doesn't make sense. Now we've come to the part where all the animals and all the birds of the world have come to get on the ark. Now, this poses some obvious problems that there's not enough area inside the ark to hold all these animals. So we have to consider that there's an extra dimensional space inside the ark. In Genesis chapter 7, verse 20, it talks about how the rains come and it raised the water level of the earth to 15 cubits above the highest mountain. Now, as those waters would have receded, there's just not enough volume of the earth to hold the amount of water that's described in the Bible. It's physically impossible. In Genesis chapter 7, verse 24, it talks about how it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, but that they had been afloat for 150 days. Now, the difference between 40 days and 150 days is the difference between a month and a week and 5 months. And Noah was told to prepare food for himself and the animals for 40 days and 40 nights. So he only had about a month and a week's worth of food, and they've already been afloat for 5 months. Another problem is that in the construction of the ark, he had one window that was 1 cubit by 1 cubit big, which is approximately this big. He had to shovel all of the animals' feces through this window. Literally, the smell would have been toxic, not only for Noah and his family, but for all of the animals. That many animals, people, whatever, cannot live in that kind of combined space with their own feces for that long without getting all kinds of sick and disease in them. In Genesis chapter 8, it talked about how the ark had come to rest on Mount Ararat, which was 150 days after the rain had begun, on the 7th month of the 17th day, which was 5 months later. In Genesis chapter 8, verse 14, it said it was the 2nd month and 17th day that they actually left the ark and the earth was dry. So they literally spent an entire year inside the ark with only 40 days worth of food. So I think it's important to ask yourself, how did Noah, his 3 sons, his wife, and their wives, all of the animals of the earth, live inside this enclosed, confined area the size of less than 3 football fields with one window about a foot by a foot for a year? And how did they get all that waste matter outside that little window? I don't know if you've ever seen elephant feces, but it's bigger than that. As Noah was storing the food for these animals, he wouldn't have much knowledge of what all these foreign animals that he'd never seen eat. And most of these animals, at least all the carnivores, eat other animals. So he would have had to bring other animals to feed those animals. Now, some people say that God closed the mouths of the animals so they wouldn't eat each other, but it doesn't say that anywhere in the Bible. Another thing to consider is that if God did close the mouth, that the animals wouldn't prey upon the other animals, then what did they eat? Did the lions eat grain for a year? I mean, you have to really consider rationally and logically what animals eat. Not just what animals eat, but how much they eat, and how much they would need to eat in 40 days compared to a year. In chapter 8, verse 20, the first thing that Noah did when he got off the ark was have a sacrifice. So they only have a limited amount of animals to repopulate the entire earth, and the first thing he does is kill one of all the clean animals. In chapter 9, verse 5, it talks about how God requires blood, that he requires our blood, and that we're required to drain the blood of animals before we eat them. So I guess before then, people just ate animals with the blood still in them. And why would God require our blood after all that? I mean, it's weird that God would require our blood. Why does God need our blood? In chapter 9, verse 11, God says that there will be no floods that would destroy man. But there's floods every year, and many people are destroyed. Now, granted that there aren't any world floods, but it doesn't say that right there. Now, later on, he comes back to say that he's talking about a world flood, but right there, he's talking about any flood. He says that there will be no flood killing people anymore. In Genesis chapter 9, verses 13 and 14, he talks about how there'll be a bow in the clouds, and every time we see a cloud, there'll be a bow to remind us of the covenant that he won't flood the earth anymore. But how many times have you seen a rainbow? Have you seen a rainbow every time you've seen a cloud? It says that every time we see a cloud, we'll see a rainbow, and that's certainly not the case. I think it's also important to ask yourself, do you really think that rainbows are a bow and that it's God's promise, or is it physics and light passing through water vapor? Think about that. Now the rest of chapter 9 talks about Noah and his sons repopulating the earth. Sam, Ham, and Japheth were his sons, and there's a little story about how Noah getting drunk and being naked, and Ham walking in and seeing him, and then later on Noah cursing Ham that Ham and all his descendants will be the servants of his brothers. And Ham's descendants are the Canaanites. And a lot of religious bigots attribute this to where black people came from. But Canaanites aren't black. Okay, Canaanites are in Lebanon and Israel and Iraq and Iran and Syria and Palestine. I mean, they're brown, you know, they're Arabic. They're not black people. That being said, if Noah and his sons repopulated the earth, where did the Oriental people come from? Or the Native American people who are red, where did they come from? Let alone the black people, and not just the black people, but there's black people and there's brown people and then there's You know, the Arabic brownish people, and then there's the super black Aborigine type people. There are many different types of people. How could they have come from Noah and his wife? Lastly, in Genesis chapter 9, verse 29, it talks about how Noah was 950 years old when he died. Now, we know that the average lifespan of people before the 20th century was 35 years old or less. Less and less as time goes back. Not like in the Bible where it talks about people being hundreds and hundreds of years old. Thank you for joining me on this reflection of the Noah's Ark story from the Bible. Next, I'm going to be talking to you about the scientific evidence that we've discovered that totally contradicts the Bible and the Noah's Ark story, so that you will have an idea of how to compare the mythology of the Bible to reality.